Hey everybody, JP here. And once again, with my buddy Drew Majewski on drums, we're going to do a little drum miking video for you. This is really going to be like part one of the Metallica kick drums. We're going to do part two with the Rockhead kick at some point in the future, but I really wanted to cover this ground before we got into that because this is kind of the setup really for that, which was kind of like an additional thing. Anyhow, although we're following the Load Studio notes as Randy Staub meticulously detailed and Metallica graciously shared with all of us on their website this summer, the reason we started this video with the double bass from one is because the foundation of those kick drum sounds actually go all the way back to And Justice for All and Flemming Rasmussen. How it went from something pretty simple on Justice, simple yet incredibly influential, and was sort of augmented by Bob Rock and Randy Staub and their preferences and what it led to over the years. Now, there's really three things you need to start this journey. An RE20 microphone, a large center-ported kick drum. Now, I do believe Lars used a 24-inch kick on Justice and the Black Album and a 22 on Load. We're using a 22, and odds are you're going to come across way more 22s in the studio than the larger size. Nice big center port, which was already kind of out of style by that time. I'll get into that more in a second. And a graphic EQ. Flemming used a Yuri on each kick drum. It looks like Bob and Randy used Clark Technic, and Lars used Clark Technic units live in his live rig, and he infamously kept a Polaroid of those initial settings Flemming used on Justice, and kind of made people follow that in the future, the RE20 through the Yuri graphics. So, getting back to the front port of the kick drum, yeah, this was already pretty out of style definitely by the 90s and probably by the late 80s as well. If you want to sort of roughly look at kick drum trends by the decade, the 60s, you had no ports on the front, just a solid front head. In fact, they weren't even close mic'd really until Jeff Emmerich did it with the Beatles on Revolver, when he infamously broke the Abbey Road studio rules and put that AKG D20 right up on the kick drum to get more impact. So, as with things, people take them to the next level. And by the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, you had the front heads being removed entirely so that you could stick a mic even closer to the beater. Of course, drum companies didn't like this because they just lost their number one place for advertising, putting their logo on the kick, right? So by the late 70s and certainly by the early 80s, you had front heads with large ports, mainly centered, and, enough room around the edges for a drum company logo, a band logo, whatever. And that's really what Lars stuck with all through the 80s and most of the 90s. In fact, I don't think he really got into smaller ports until the 2000s. And even then, even on his current drums, they're still centered and they're like at least an 8-inch port. So that's really a big part of his sound. In fact, we actually bought a new front head for the kick drum just for this and cut a 10-inch hole in the front because otherwise there was just no way to get these mic positions accurately. By the time I was coming up in this industry in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was all about smaller off-centered ports, usually no bigger than 5 to 6 inches. And the idea being that you didn't want it centered because when the batter hits the batter head, you want to get the maximum resonance possible from the front head. So you would put the port off center so that it wouldn't diminish that. And then you'd sort of angle a mic in. You could barely get an RE20 in some of those small ports. And I think that's a big part of the reason why I never used them all that much for this. They do take EQ incredibly well, and which you'll find out here because Flemming EQ'd the snot out of it. Yeah, they're very moldable. They're very much like clay when it comes to being able to sort of sculpt the sound that's coming through them. So getting back to that, why don't we listen to the RE20? Now, if you're looking at the load diagrams, this would be the mic all the way on the left. It's about 8 inches from the side of the drum and almost a foot from the beater. So it's practically sticking out. Depending on how deep your drum is, it might not even be all the way in there. So let me show you what that mic sounds like by itself. By the way, every mic channel here has a Neve 1081 and an SSL E channel on it, just for the box sound. There might be one or two cases where I'm doing a little bit of tweaking with them, but for the most part, it's just passing through. So that's the RE20. Again, nothing all that special by itself, but this Waves graphic EQ, listen to that. Now, this was the perfect tool for the job. I really am not a big fan of Waves plugins. I'm trying to get away from them as much as possible, but I kind of had to buy this one because it really was the perfect thing out there for this. Mainly because it has a built-in analyzer, spectrum analyzer, and I was able to take a loop of, that is the kick drum from Blackened. That is one of the only parts in the drum stems where I could get an isolated kick drum. So I'm feeding that into the sidechain, and it's not an EQ matching plugin, but I'm manually matching it to the curve that's present there. So if we do a little back and forth, that's our drum. So I'd say we got pretty close just by matching it visually with this EQ. Now, there is one picture that Fleming has shown of the Uri 30 band EQs on the kick drums. It's not a great picture. He has mentioned in one of his recent videos, his masterclass videos, that that's really all he had to work with. They just didn't document it as much as he would have liked. So yeah, that little picture is what we're going by. And yes, I know I'm boosting a little more of the extreme top end on the plugin compared to Fleming's picture, but there was just more top end in the kick when I was comparing the two. So it had to be coming from somewhere. If he wasn't getting it from the Uri graphic, maybe it was coming from the Neve or someplace like that. So I made up for it here. And again, that's One-on-One Studios, the same studio where Metallica did the Black Album. As you can see, they actually replaced those equipment racks between 1988 and 1990 when Metallica was in there for the Black Album. But for the most part, I think it's a lot of the same gear in them. Definitely the Neve 1081s over there. But yeah, I'd say we came pretty close with this match. Again, that's the Justice kick. And that's ours. Not bad considering the Justice kick is a little bigger. And, you know, from the pictures I could see, I think they only used an RE20 on that kick. I couldn't find any evidence of another microphone being used. I know Toby Wright, who assisted that album, mentioned some different mics like a D112 and a 421. I've never seen any evidence of that in any of the pictures. And Fleming, I don't think, has ever mentioned it either. So we're just gonna have to go with this for now. Like I said, we're gonna go along a little trip through time, right? So let's move this to the side for a second. Black Album. What's different about the Black Album? Well, if you look at pictures, you'll see there's an RE20 in Lars's kick in just about the same spot. And there's also a 421 next to it. And according to the load notes, the RE20 and the 421 were bussed together through the Clark Technic graphic EQ to tape. Now, why do I bring up the load notes? We're talking about the Black Album because we know from interviews with Bob Rock and I think Lars even said it himself that they basically started load with the same drum sound as the Black Album and then altered it to taste. So looking at the input list of the microphones from the load sessions that we have access to, we can see that the RE20 and the 421 on each kick were some of the first mics plugged in, and then later on other elements were added. So I think it's a safe bet that this was done on the Black Album, and as you'll see, it certainly sounds like it. On the miking notes, the 421 would be the one on the far right. That's a bit closer to the batter head. So this is it by itself. Bypass that EQ. That's 421. Let's hear that. And the RE20. So nothing special until you get into they sound great together with that EQ. I will say, again, another props to Randy Staub moment. If you look at, let me just zoom in and show you. If you look at the phase relationship on these mics, they're damn near perfect. These are the 3 inside mics. We haven't got to the third one yet, but still, look at that phase. And then as we get to the mics that are outside, they're still, I mean, you following the measurements, they are still almost perfectly aligned. I didn't touch any of these. This is exactly just following Randy's measurements. This is how they came through. So, yeah, pretty incredible. And let me just toggle the 421 on and off. I thought it sounded better slightly lower here. That's without it. That's without the RE20. So this is going to be our foundation for the Black Album and for Load. And now another thing the Black Album had going on was there was a 47 FET, a U47, the FET, the transistor version, outside of the front head. And it appears to me, it's really tough to tell. We don't have a ton of documentation on the Black Album, but it looks like if you look, there's in the year and a half in the life of Metallica, there's a quick shot of one of the track sheets. And from what I could make out, it looks like they have the 421 and the RE20 going to a pair of tracks, you know, for each kick drum. So those 2 mics were mixed together through the EQ onto their own tracks. Then there's a pair of sort of unlabeled kick tracks. You know, they're all labeled primary and secondary for kick 1 and kick 2. It doesn't say what mic they are, though. So I think that they are the U47. And for that, we used my good old Sound Deluxe U195, which is kind of a similar style mic. And we don't have the measurements for this, but just going by visually, that's about where it looks like it's sitting on the Black Album. And I am enhancing this a little bit with a Pultec, just because, again, we have a smaller kick drum than Lars used on the Black Album, so I wanted to bring out a little more bottom. That's without the Pultec. So a little basketball-y by itself, right? But when we mix it in with the others, let me take it in and out for you. That's in. That's without it. So definitely adding to the resonance. And then another thing that the Black Album started was the kick room mic, which was in the Black Album, it was a pair of AKG C12 tube mics. On Load, it was a pair of Neumann U47 tube mics, just about 3 feet in front of each kick drum. Actually, 38 3/8 inches is what we have here for kick 1 of the Load notes. Now, I can't afford either of those. If I could afford either of those, I probably wouldn't be doing these videos. I'd be hanging out on my yacht somewhere. So I'm using my Soyuz 1973 condenser mic as our drum room mic here. And I'm also compressing it a lot to make up for the fact that I have a small room. And as you can see, I put that plywood in front of it to get some reflection. But I'm using this kind of complex. That's without it. So I'm compressing a lot to sort of give it more of a big room sound, which if we compare it with, that's the Enter Sandman kick drum. So there's a lot of room going on, and this stays throughout the song, even in the verses. There's so much room on the Sandman kicks. So without having that giant room at One-on-One Studios, that's about as close to that as I'm going to get in my basement. And these kick room mics went to separate tracks on the Black Album. You can see that on the track sheet. So that means each kick drum had 3 tracks. 6 tracks total of a 24-track machine. Pretty awesome. For kick drum lovers, anyway. Now, on the load sessions, the interesting thing is that the kick room mics did not get their own tracks. I'm assuming they were blended into the stereo pair of room tracks that all the other room mics were blended down to. So for load, I don't think there's quite as much of the kick rooms in there. There's probably a lot of other room mics. And also, the U47 FET is not apparent in Randy's documentation. There's no mention of that. What there is an additional 421 added. And that additional 421, you can see it's in the middle. It's the third one kind of in between the initial RE20 and 421 mics. And it's pretty much even with the RE20 in terms of its distance from the front head. That sketch is not entirely to scale, and we're talking about the difference between 11.5 inches from the batter head for the RE20 and 11.125 for this additional extra 421. And it sits just above it, which is kind of where you have to go with it to get it in there. Again, this was in just following his diagrams. It was in perfect phase alignment with the other two. So kudos to him for that. And, I'm sure that took him a while to accomplish. It took us, really just a matter of following his measurements, and it all landed perfectly. So this seems to have replaced the U47 on load. So let's hear that by itself. And I want to do a couple things here. I want to compare it to the other 421 for you without an EQ on. So that's the new 421. And that's the old 421. Again, new. A little further back, so it's got a little more body to it. And the other one's a bit closer to the beater, so a little more attack to it. Together, they work quite well. Again, really nice combination. Now I've added the RE20. Now let's put the EQ back on those initial 2 mics, our foundation mics. So now the new 421 is not going through that EQ because it went to a separate track on tape. There is mention in the notes that it went through a GML EQ. We don't have those settings, so I don't really want to speculate on that. But you can see it adds quite a bit. I feel like this was a little bit of a way to get away from that super scooped EQ sound, add a little more body to it. And I want to compare what this adds with what the U195 adds as well. So here we go. That's U195 along with our main mics. This is additional 421. So I would say that new 421 is adding quite a bit of body to the sound for the load sessions, and not in the same way that the 47 FET did for the Black Album sessions. The 47 FET added more low end, more bass to that sound. And I feel like on this, it was more body. It was more like a little more punch, more of a solid feeling in the mid-range. And again, if we listen to that, we could add some kick room in there. And again, my Soyuz mic is neither a C12 nor a U47, but I think it sounds damn good here. Oh, one thing I should add, I did find a picture of the load drum kit mic'd up with the 47 FET on it, and apparently only two mics on the inside, the RE20 and the 421. So what I can't tell is if that was something they started with and then lost the 47 and added the 421, or if they went back to it later, maybe for Reload or Garage Inc., because I believe you can tell it's the Plant Studio based on the wall decorations in the background. The kit appears to be the same one used for the load sessions. Yeah, we'd really need like a timestamp on that picture, which I don't have. So for now, we're just going to have to guess. Maybe they went back to the 47 FET, or maybe they started with it for load and then replaced it. And again, I wanted to show you what the Studer was doing. I know a lot of you really liked the way that sounded on the toms. So that's without it. Not quite as drastic on the kicks. It's very pleasing, but it's not quite as drastic as it was on the toms. And then Kive X-Bus, which is quickly replacing the Waves SSL bus compressor for me. A little louder without it, actually. I don't have that balanced perfectly. And that's without the EQ. All I'm doing on the EQ is, what, a dB and a half at 10K shelf, and 1 dB at 90 hertz, actually, low end. So I don't think I would necessarily use the extra 421 and the U195 together. I mean, it's not bad. It just starts to get a little woofy. I feel like they're both doing really the same kind of thing. Kind of fun to play with, all these things, though. So, yeah, I hope you dug this. This was a lot of fun to do. It was really cool to sort of try these different mic positions out. Again, when I was coming up, it was mostly the smaller off-center ports. So we weren't miking drums like this. The rule of thumb that we had when I was starting out was you wanted to, obviously you couldn't get a very big mic in a small port. And it was all about like a 45-degree angle at the beater. We used to use the ATM 25 kick drum mic a lot. That was a big one in our studio. And the AKG D112, which was, just kind of an industry standard. So yeah, we mostly use those on the insides and like a 47 FET on the outside. If it was, we only had one of those. So if it was a double kick, maybe we would use like U87s or the other Neumanns, the TLM, I think 103s we had. So, we would kind of use them on the outside if need be. But yeah, rarely did I ever have more than one mic on the inside of a drum just due to space and getting it in there. So when I saw these, I had to dive in. And the fact that all three mics are positioned on axis at the beater head, I thought was really cool and fascinating that Randy's measurements translate to such a perfect phase relationship. I mean, that is just some precise engineering, because inch or a half inch in any direction, and that would throw that off big time. So once again, kudos to Randy, true master of his craft. And I hope we'll be back soon with the Rockhead kick drum video. I'm not sure when we're going to get around to that, but I'm sure I'll be doing more stuff in the meantime as well. All right. So until then, everybody, thank you so much for the likes, comments, subscriptions, buy me a coffees. I appreciate all that stuff. And please keep it coming. I love it. All right. I'll talk to you all soon. Take care.